January 17, 1940. Dearborn, Michigan. Before sunrise, the Rouge is a black ribbon under ice and smoke. Inside Ford's vast plant, the air tastes of hot steel and cutting oil. A conveyor chain clinks in the half-dark, and wooden shipping crates, stenciled, nailed shut, stacked like a quiet army, wait beside an assembly line that was never meant to fight a war. America, in that winter, did not yet have enough military trucks to carry an army across an ocean. But it had something else. Factories built for ordinary citizens, ready to be bent, almost overnight, into instruments of national power. This is the story of January 1940, Detroit, Michigan. Before dawn, the Rouge River carries a skin of ice, and the air over the Ford complex tastes of coal smoke and machine oil. Inside the plant, lights burn behind tall windows, an industrial sunrise that does not belong to the weather. The metal floors hold a cold that climbs through boots. A foreman's clipboard taps against a railing, a small sound swallowed by bigger ones. The distant hammering of presses, the hiss of steam, the steady, indifferent rhythm of conveyor chains. On paper, America is not at war. In newspapers, Europe is burning at a distance, and in Washington the language is still cautious: preparedness, defense, neutrality, aid. Yet in factories like these, the future is already arriving on the night shift. Because in 1940, the United States Army was not the mechanized colossus that later photographs will suggest. It is a force caught between eras. Between horses and engines, between small professional traditions and the demands of a world war that is clearly coming, even if no one will yet speak the full sentence aloud. America has steel, coal, oil, engineers, and assembly lines. But it does not yet have enough military trucks, the unglamorous machines that decide whether armies can move, eat, shoot, and survive. And so this moment matters, not for the roar of tanks, not for the silhouette of bombers, but for the quiet problem of wheels. In the first years of the war in Europe, Germany's armies demonstrated what speed can do. Blitzkrieg becomes a word that terrifies entire capitals. Columns of vehicles race through the Low Countries and into France, infantry rides and marches behind armored spearheads, radios crackle, supply trucks follow in dust. It looks like modern war, and it changes everything about what people think is possible. But this is also an illusion of purity. Germany's armies, even at their most feared, are not fully motorized. Large portions still rely on horses, wagons, and boots. Their mobility is uneven. Their logistics strained by distance and consumption. Their strength is concentrated, not universal. Yet in 1940, the world saw the spear and not the shaft. The image becomes the lesson. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches and calculates. The American Army's leaders understand that a modern force requires more than rifles and courage. It requires transport. It requires a way to move ammunition faster than fear, to move fuel faster than enemy artillery, to move food and spare parts faster than mud and winter can steal them. It requires trucks, thousands upon thousands of trucks, built not as civilian conveniences, but as military instruments designed to survive overload, bad roads, sabotage, and war. But the United States has not built that fleet yet. The reason is not a lack of intelligence or a lack of factories. It is time and political reality. In the interwar years, the nation demobilized. Budgets shrink. Public appetite for massive rearmament is thin. The memory of the First World War is still present, its casualties, its disillusionment, its sense that Europe's problems were endless and contagious. The army modernizes slowly, in pieces, often by improvisation. So when the crisis sharpens, the army turns to what America already has in abundance: civilian industry. This is where Ford enters the story, not as a single man's myth, but as a system. Ford is not alone. General Motors, Chrysler, and many others will also become pillars of wartime production. But Ford's name, stamped into steel and carried across continents, becomes one of the clearest symbols of what the United States can do when it decides to do it. The popular imagination likes to picture war machines as born war machines, tanks from tank factories, military trucks from military lines. But the truth of 1940 and 1941 is messier and more revealing. America's early answer is conversion. Civilian models, designed for farmers, contractors, delivery routes, and small businesses, become the raw material for military power. In a nation where private demand has created a vast automotive ecosystem, the army does not need to invent everything from scratch. It needs to be redirected. And redirection, in an industrial society, can be faster than invention. Factories that once built cars for families begin adapting to build vehicles for war. The parts bins change. the tolerances shift. Paint turns from glossy colors to functional olive drab. Chrome disappears. Rubber and steel become ration priorities. The supply chains rewire. The language on the floor changes. Production quotas, contracts, inspections, government specifications. The American ability to do this, to take civilian abundance and reshape it into military capacity, becomes one of the decisive advantages of the war. And yet for the men who will fight against it, that advantage will arrive not as a theory but as a shock. German soldiers, and later Japanese soldiers, will encounter American mobility as something close to unnatural. In Europe, the Wehrmacht expects an enemy that is either decadent or slow, an industrial giant perhaps, but one that will take years to wake up, years to organize, years to send anything that matters. In the Pacific, Japanese planners understand American industrial potential in abstract terms, but they gamble that distance, morale, and early victories will buy time. What they will find instead is a world where the time between decision and delivery is brutally short. A soldier in the field does not see congressional appropriations or committee hearings. He sees what arrives at the front. He sees trucks. He sees convoys that do not end. He sees the physical manifestation of an economy that can feed an army while still feeding itself. He sees crates, spare tires, fuel drums, engines, an endless procession of industrial confidence. That contrast, the expectation of American sluggishness versus the experience of American output, becomes emotional warfare in itself. And so we return to 1940, to the cold floor of a factory that is still, technically, civilian. The story of Ford converting civilian models into war machines is part of a larger national transformation. When the War Production Board later orders the end of civilian car and truck production in 1942, it formalizes what had already begun, a total conversion of industry toward war. The shift was sweeping. The government's wartime mobilization created new coordination systems, new priorities, and new limitations on consumer life, while demanding unprecedented output from factories that had once been built for peacetime markets. At places like Ford's Richmond assembly plant, the conversion became visible in numbers that no battlefield report could capture. Built in 1931 to produce civilian automobiles, the plant transitioned into a wartime role after civilian automobile production was banned. It assembled jeeps and served as a tank depot, processing enormous quantities of armored vehicles for the Pacific Theater. The National Park Service notes that the Richmond facility assembled 49,000 jeeps and processed 91,000 tanks, half-tracks, armored cars, and other military vehicles, figures that reveal not just production, but scale as strategy. Those are not simply statistics. They are a kind of battlefield, measured in units instead of casualties. And they carry a message. In dictatorships, industrial effort is often presented as the triumph of the state, the leaders will made steel. In democracies, it can be something different, a dispersed miracle, built by contracts, arguments, wages, unions, mistakes, revisions, and relentless repetition. It is noisier, less theatrical, less perfectly choreographed. But it can be deeper, because it draws on a broader base. That is why the symbolic object in this story is not a flag or a medal. It is a shipping crate. A simple wooden box, stenciled with numbers and destinations, reinforced at the corners, filled with parts that do not look heroic until they save someone's life. A crate with bolts. A crate with spark plugs. A crate with bearings. A crate with a replacement axle. A crate that says, without poetry, that someone far away is thinking about tomorrow. The recurring crate becomes the quiet emblem of American abundance, because abundance is not only what is consumed, but what can be replaced. In war, replacement is mercy. In early 1940, German soldiers marching through Europe are not yet thinking about American crates. Their world is still dominated by the illusion of their own momentum. They move through conquered towns and captured depots. They take fuel where they can find it. They repair what they can salvage. They improvise. When they picture an industrial enemy, they imagine one that must build everything new and ship it across an ocean. They imagine delays. They imagine bureaucracy. They imagine a democracy arguing itself into paralysis. But the American response does not begin with perfection. It begins with conversion. Civilian models, already proven on roads, are adapted into military forms. This is not glamorous engineering. It is practical engineering. It is the logic of a nation that has already built millions of vehicles for private life, now redirecting that capacity into public war. And as production accelerates, the war begins to change shape. In the European theater, American and Allied forces will eventually become synonymous with transport. The war will be fought not only by divisions and artillery, but by the ability to move fuel and ammunition across broken infrastructure. In the Pacific, the distances will be so vast that logistics becomes a second ocean. The trucks are not accessories. They are arteries. The emotional contrast becomes sharper when viewed from the other side. German soldiers who had expected to fight an enemy of limited will begin to encounter supply lines that seem inexhaustible. Japanese soldiers who had gambled that America could be kept at bay begin to see their enemies arrive again and again, repaired, replenished, reinforced. The transformation is not only military, it is ideological, because what does it mean, in the mind of a soldier raised in authoritarian certainty, to face an enemy whose strength is built by factories that once built family cars? What does it mean to realize that a society capable of mass-producing comfort can also mass-produce war, and that it can do both without collapsing into hunger? The question eats at certainty. In the end, this story is not a simple tale of, America had no trucks, then Ford fixed it overnight. History rarely moves overnight, but history does pivot. It turns on decisions and capacities that were prepared long before anyone recognized their value. The assembly line, created to serve consumer life, becomes a weapon without being designed as one. That is the deeper lesson. Democracy's greatest industrial advantage is not merely volume, but flexibility. The ability to convert peacetime abundance into wartime necessity, and then, when the war ends, to convert again. A dictatorship can command production, but it cannot easily recreate the underlying abundance that makes conversion possible without starvation. A free society can argue, delay, hesitate, and still, when it finally commits, unleash a scale that feels like the sudden opening of a gate. The shipping crate returns, again and again, in ports, depots, and muddy roads. Wooden proof that the American war effort is not just fighting today, but planning for the next repair, the next push, the next winter. And when the war is over, the crates stop arriving at the front. The lines go quiet. The machines that made war machines return to making civilian life again. That reversal, back to ordinary abundance, is itself a kind of victory. Because the most haunting power of American production during World War II was not only that it could build trucks and jeeps and tanks in huge numbers. It was that it could do so, and still. Imagine a future in which those factories would once again serve private lives, not permanent mobilization. In that sense, the true war machine was not the truck. It was the capacity to choose what the factory would become. And that capacity, messy, contested, democratic, is what turned cold factory floors in 1940 into the moving force of victory.